I know that last video was a long one. Sorry, that's my bad. I'll make this one short for you. What do we need to know? Well, we're starting on nuclear waste and nuclear waste management and what we have to do with that stuff. And there are tens of tons of this stuff a year. So we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. But the thing you need to know is that there's two different types of nuclear waste. There's high level and then there's low level nuclear waste. What's the difference between them? Well, high level nuclear waste is what you might think of. It's the actual uranium, the spent uranium that were used in the nuclear reactors, and it's not viable anymore. It's the things we actually have to be careful about, you have to store, and to make sure that no one that's not supposed to gets their hands on it, because you could still use it for some stuff that's not so great. Low-level nuclear waste is way less exciting. It's like clothes and shoes and protective wear. It's still a lot, so we got to figure out something to do with it, but it's not nearly as cool or exciting if nuclear waste disposal is cool or exciting. So what we do then is we go around and we try to find some different places to put it, and we being the US government in this case, found this great spot. It's a mountain in the middle of Nevada, and it's way away from people. It's not near a nuclear facility. It's not near a tectonically active zone. It's not near people. Like, it's great. We can use it. Awesome. Until the people that lived there said no. I mean, I get it, I guess. If it's somewhere that you live nearby, you don't want a bunch of nuclear waste and have to deal with all that, especially because, the U.S. military and the Department of Energy has to make sure that no one's getting the material that shouldn't have it. So, okay, but we still have to do something with it. Now, it was ended, and then the last administration kind of started talks about it again because we were still using nuclear energy. I don't know where the current administration sits with this Yucca Mountain plan, but we have to find a place to put this nuclear energy because we are using it. We do need to find storage for all the uranium. So there's two different ways then that we can store it. The first is called transmutation. And transmutation is just this kind of fancy sounding term for make it into something else. Maybe it's put into a different kind of fuel, or maybe it's used in a lower level reactor, or maybe it's kind of blended with different quality of fuel and you can make it into something viable again. Think of it like nuclear recycling. The other one's called geologic disposal, and it's basically like dig a hole in the ground and bury it. Okay, so maybe it's not just that simple. You have to find a place that's geologically sound and it's safe and it's secure and it's a place that can be guarded. And yeah, it's more complicated than just dig a hole in the ground and bury it. But ultimately, when you get through all those hurdles that you have to jump through and all the hoops and all the I's and the T's and all that stuff, you're good to just put it in the ground, basically. But we gotta still keep our eye on it. Why does this matter? Well, nuclear power, though it's not a huge percentage, is still about 10 or so percent of the United States' current power production, which means it still has nuclear waste that we need to do something with. And there's short term, and there's middle term, and there's long term, and middle term is probably a term that you haven't heard of. Short term you understand, long term you understand. What is middle term? Well, here's the thing. We know that fossil fuels, whether you like them or not, and whether it's cheap or not, and whether it's easy or not, we know they're running out. We know they're finite. We know they're non-renewable. So we got to do something with them. And renewables, whether you like them or not, we know that they're not ready yet to take over 100% of the power that we need. We just can't do it. Whether it's a technology thing or a land thing or a financial thing, you just can't do it. So some people say that nuclear power, because it's still non-renewable, once you mine all the uranium out of the ground and once you get all the viable fuel sources out of the ground, you are done with nuclear energy. We can't make more uranium. Now, we don't use just uranium, and there's processes that we look at, and it gets complicated. But this whole thing is complicated. There's whole majors and grad programs and PhD programs, and economists look at it, and geologists look at it, and energy planners look at it, and it's just these huge, huge questions that we have to answer, because no answer that we can come up with is easy. Imagine trying to get however many people in your class to agree on the same thing. That's hard enough as it is, and there's like 9 to 16 of you. Now imagine that we had all of you together and it was like, 25 to 30. Now imagine we had to get an entire high school, which is 1,700. You see the problem. When you have to get an entire country of 330 million people to agree to something, it's probably going to take a while, and we need to figure out what solution we have in between to at least get us to these renewables. Now, you can love renewables or not, and you probably, since we're getting ready to go into them, they're the last of our energy sources, have learned a little bit about renewables in the past. Well, what you've learned may or may not be correct. And I bet a lot of what you have heard is not going to be correct. And that's no one's fault because, like I just said, it's a complicated thing. There's a lot of stuff that I don't know and I'm still learning with you as we go along. But what we do need to understand is that renewables are not a simple, easy answer, but they're also not as complicated as some people make them out to be. So why renewables? Why even look at it? Well, since I've been teaching, it's already gone from about 8 or 9 to 13% of the US power, and it's only going to continue to grow as we move into the future. And it's overtaking nuclear. It's still a long way off from that 80%, which is fossil fuels. But we know that we have to eventually transition to renewables. But we know we can't do it right now. There's not an easy answer. So which one do you think that we should use? Well, that's kind of a trick question. We can't rely on one type of renewable energy. It's just not possible. One energy source is not going to, save us. But let's think about the fossil fuels. One energy source there didn't save us either. We can't rely on just coal or just oil or just natural gas. We can't rely on just nuclear. We've never been able to rely on just one energy source. So when people say, well, we can't use only one thing, we've never used only one thing. So we can't let that be a barrier into us moving to renewable energies. So what do we have to know about them? Well, the first thing is we need to worry about the pollution that these other things are, releasing. Now, I just told you that nuclear only releases steam from its power plants, but we have to keep in mind that whether you like nuclear power or not, you do have to have a place to put this nuclear waste material that needs to go somewhere. So it's still a form of pollution. Maybe it's not air pollution, like fossil fuels are. It's not releasing carbon dioxide and methane and sulfur dioxide and all that stuff, but nuclear is still giving pollution. Well, renewables aim to cut that way down. And yes, there might still be some pollution with renewable energy creation, but we're going to talk about where that comes into play and how that's mitigated. The next thing we have to understand is that there are a lot of needs for this energy. There's electricity, there's heating and cooling, there's transportation, there's mechanical, there's agriculture, there's all sorts of different things we need energy for, and we have to be cognizant of the idea that one answer here is not going to be the answer for everyone, nor is it going to be the answer for one location. So what's the big one? Where does most of our energy go to? Well, how I'm talking to you right now, or how you can see me, and how I'm recording this. Electricity. Electricity is our largest consumer, or not consumer, but our largest sector of energy needs. And how does this work? Well, we're going to learn a little bit more about it, and if you're interested in physics, then electricity is a whole different type of physics, and it's a whole thing of engineering, and it's pretty complicated when you get into it, but we're going to keep it simple for right now. Basically, you need to have some kind of source, the power grid in this example, that goes through a loop, and it has to be closed. You have to have contact points of everything. Now, this whole closed loop is something that you know as a circuit. Now, they can be really simple, they can be really complicated, but all energy ultimately boils down to where does the power come from? Does it have a full circuit? Does it have a full loop that it can go through, that it can get back to where it started originally, theoretically? If you don't have that, you have what's called an open circuit, and it's not going to work. That's how our lights turn off, is we open the circuit. But we measure this in watts, and watt is what we call the rate of doing work here electrically. You can use watts for lights, like a 60-watt bulb, and you could theoretically measure a car in watts if you wanted. Now, it doesn't make sense for a lot of cars, but with Teslas becoming more and more popular and other EVs becoming more and more popular, maybe we talk about that in the future. To measure your power, though, you don't measure it in watts explicitly, you measure it in kilowatts, 1,000 watts. But it's not just kilowatts, it's how many kilowatts hours you've used, or kilowatt hours. So if you were to go to look at an energy bill, what you would see is how many kilowatt hours you used, and each kilowatt hour has a certain rate, like 8 or 9 or 10 cents or something like that, and you multiply the two, and that's how much money you have to pay the power company. Now, maybe renewables are a little more expensive, but it's not as expensive as you think. What does this mean? Where do we get it from? Where do we get the bulk of our renewable energy? Well, hydropower, and that's going to be the largest, right now, source of renewable energy. Now, we're not going to go into renewable energies, the specifics just yet, so we're going to end here at hydropower, but the next one is going to be knocking out the different types of renewables and where we can find them and where we can use them and where's the best place to use them and what that means for us moving forward.